Hello everyone, my name is Michael Judd. I am a permaculture designer that lives in Frederick, Maryland in the Blue Ridge Mountains. I spent 20 years of my adult life living in rural Latin America, where I really fast-tracked my learning on food growing systems, natural building, sort of homesteading for real, and how to make it realistic. And I've come back to living in the mid-Atlantic here in Maryland 10 years ago, and started a edible landscaping company called Ecologia, and captured the first 3 years of those jobs and designs into my first book, Edible Landscaping with a Permaculture Twist. It's a very how-to book. Many of the images that will be shared today in this presentation are found in this book, along with more detail than I'm going to be able to cover in this presentation. So it's a great follow-up to some of the subjects we will just touch on today. And then I went ahead and wrote a second book, For the Love of Pawpaws, because the pawpaw is such a unique, amazing species and fruit. It definitely deserves many books written about it. And we'll touch a little bit on that later in this presentation. I just wanted to give you a little backdrop of some of the work that I've been doing in recent times. The centerpiece of our homestead is this circular straw bale home. The inspiration for this design came from Earth Haven, which is a permaculturally designed community in North Carolina near Black Mountain. This structure took us about 4 years to build. We built it with wood from our land. We have about 25 acres here that we steward, mostly woodlands with a creek running through it. And the open areas that we have, about 3 acres, are filled with food forests, our small nursery. We do a lot of mushroom growing. It's really kind of an amazing rural yet on the edge of suburbia homestead. It's really kind of a nice edge to be in and to work with. So this home is amazing. It was quite an experience to build, partly because it was in the round, but it's been wonderful. We've lived in it now for 5 years. I highly recommend straw bales for temperate zones. We've had lots of success with it, and all the other examples that I'm familiar with that have been done well are thriving. The first straw bale house that was built way back in the 1880s out in Nebraska, still being lived in. So this is a sort of a somewhat modern technology that is really proving itself. And I hope this house lives for hundreds of years based on, how much it took to build it. The house is covered in lime plaster, which allows water to hit it and yet not penetrate. But it also allows the bales to breathe. It's important not to seal your straw bales. You don't want to trap moisture. The inside of the house has earthen plasters on the bales. We have earthen roof, passive ventilation, meaning that we have the upper windows and the cupola windows, which allows cool air to come in low and hot air to exit out. In the summer, the house stays cool by the thick walls, that passive ventilation, and then also the roof having soil and plants keeps heat from absorbing into the house. Most heat into structures, homes, buildings, offices comes through the roof. So we found the living roof to really come through nicely in keeping the house cool. Here it is, a snapshot from the back. It is, let's see, the footprint is 1,100 square feet, and we have a loft inside that's about 230 feet. So all said, we have about 1,320 feet in this house, and it's perfect for us. I really would not have wanted to try and build anything bigger, so we're pleased with the way it's gone. Here you can see an aerial, a little bit more of where we're at here in the Blue Ridge Mountains. This was taken here in the fall, and this is showing the Pawpaw Festival getting set up. We have a celebration here as part of what we do is bring together culture, ecology, and economy, and celebrating and having festivals for tree crops, in this case, the pawpaw. It really brings all of those together. In the open areas, as you'll see, is where we've been designing our food forests and mushroom growing and gardens and an event space. So really kind of stacking functions with where we are, being, on the edge of rural, and then also being close to, sort of the suburbia and the mid-Atlantic area. Everybody's got a different edge to work with, and permaculture design helps us, figure out, how can we work with the edge where we are? How do we put designs together that are realistic for the ecology, for the economy, and for the culture around us? This is our crazy crew that lives here. My beautiful wife, Ashley, and our two children, Jaya, who's 2, and Wyatt. There in the front is 8. These kids have been born into this life, literally, in our home. And this is what's normal for them. It's wonderful to watch, a human grow up in this kind of environment. Definitely an experiment, but one that seems to be going well. Okay, so the house, when we started it, for the foundation, we did what's called a rubble trench foundation. Basically, this is just packed gravel. So instead of putting rebar and cement into the ground, which is guaranteed to fail at some point, we use stone. The oldest structures on the planet are with stone foundations. So, and this is all coded. We had our plans architecturally drawn. We had them engineered, structurally engineered, and that seemed to be the main thing for coding, that somebody else was willing to put their neck on the line and say, yes, we okay this and we engineer it. So we really didn't have issues. We actually found a lot of support through our local permitting office. I think they were interested in doing something new and different. And anyway, so the foundation here is called Rubble Trench Foundation. It's packed gravel. It's 3 feet wide, 3 feet deep, and we only excavated where we were going to put the weight structures for the house. So we minimally impacted, the site, minimal excavation, and a lot less cost for doing this. I basically rented a mini excavator and did most all of this ourselves. Without too much previous experience. For the better, for the worse, it actually worked out. And that's my old steady partner there, Chulo in the middle, my dog. So many steps later, here you can see our roundwood to roundwood timber framing. So most of the wood on our property is tulip poplar. So I'd say 90% of what we use to build with in the house is tulip poplar. And we hand peeled the logs. We sawmilled on site for the decking up there that's holding up the roof. That's 2 and 3 inches thick, the deck boards to help hold up the weight of the roof. And the bales are the infill. We had workshops. Sometimes that was helpful. Sometimes we had to go back and do a lot of repair. My recommendation, if you go this route, is to maybe have smaller groups, really monitor the quality of what's being done, or it can kind of undo a lot. So certain things like doing the roof, bringing all that soil up, that was a great workshop to have lots of hands-on. Putting in the bales, I think having a smaller group and being a little more prepared would have helped. We had to come back and do quite a bit of fixing. But at the same time, it was wonderful. We built community. A lot of people put their hands and their hearts into our home, and that's definitely still felt. So we got to build community. We got to create a lot of lasting friendships by doing workshops. So it's a mixed bag, but I'm glad we did it. The roof is amazing. We did it different than a lot of quote unquote green roofs, which use imported materials like perlite and permaculite, have a lot of entropy and really aren't very green or eco in their makeup. We were able to use straight topsoil and compost, 50-50 mix. And we put that on top of a really cool fabric called Inca drain, ENKA drain. And it's basically a recycled um, plastic web that allows excess moisture out of the soil to come out and drain out. So with that fabric, we were able to use straight compost and straight topsoil, and we have the most lush, most beautiful green roof I've seen anywhere. So just throwing that out there, because typically you will not hear about anybody using just compost and soil, and I recommend it over some of those other imported high entropy mediums, which also dry out way too much. Most of these green roofs don't look green to me. Anyway, let's keep going. So the interior is gorgeous in our home. We really went the extra mile to make it attractive for people who are looking to build homes, to know that this style of natural building can be beautiful. It's not just a hippie shack in the woods. This is actually very aesthetic, very comfortable, very modern, yet using the materials that exist around us. And yes, we have earthen floors, earthen plaster. We have a compost toilet. We have gray water, which means that all of our water is gravity fed out into a couple of raised beds outside of our home. So we have low input for the house now. Which means that electricity goes down, the systems around us stop working, we're fine. Plus, our constant inputs are very little. Our electricity use is minimal. And we heat the house in the wintertime with just an armful of wood a day. This is a masonry stove, a finished design that very efficiently burns and then slowly emits that heat out into your home. So you fill this chamber once with wood, you burn it down once, then you close the whole thing up, and then it slowly flywheels that heat out in a really nice way. It's a kind of heat that sort of wraps around you. So maybe for the entire winter, we might use a couple of cords of wood. So very efficient. I do recommend, even if it's a retrofit, to consider getting some sort of masonry stove design. This one is a temp cast, TEMP cast model. They're out of Canada. A couple other friends have the same design. Very happy with it. There are many these days, but I do recommend having your own heat source as a backup, and then also, have your water, source. If you're on a well, you can get a manual pump, so that if your electricity and your other systems go down, you've got your basics covered, which in the north is heat and then water and then food. Okay, let's move on to the food forests. So this is one of our food forests. We have approximately 3 acres of food forests that we work with. And so a food forest is not growing food in the forest, it's growing food like the forest. So when we look at a healthy ecosystem, a healthy forest, we see a lot going on. We see overstory, midstory, understory trees, shrubs, herbaceous layers, vines, all very intimately living and thriving together. So we observe that and we're like, okay, when we come out on our landscape and we're going to start planting trees and designing, let's take that successful model and not just plant a tree all by itself in, sort of the lawn or, out in the field where it doesn't have any support. Let's create these ecosystems, these small ecosystems for that tree. Think of it as companion planting, perennial companion planting. But in the temperate north, where the sunlight is not so intense, we're going to spread that concept out so that we have more, sort of mid-story and small story type trees, so that we're getting enough sunlight for productivity and for fruit and nut harvest. So yeah, this is one of our little food forests. This one's about 10 years old. But before we get too far into that, I would like to talk about some of the upfront design considerations, what we call earthworks, to be considered before you jump in and start planting, because by having some of these designs in up front, it sets the stage for ease, success, and what I call designing for neglect. So these are 2 pawpaws sitting on a swale with a nitrogen fixing lead plant in between. So let's talk about the first concept there of swale. A swale on contour means that you have found contour, meaning you're staying perfectly perpendicular to the changing slope. And you're going to dig out a basin and put that soil on the downhill side, and it becomes a raised bed or a berm, right? That basin can then be filled in with wood chips, or it can be seeded, with nitrogen fixing clovers or other mixes. And then that raised berm is a wonderful place to go ahead and plant, whether that's your garden, whether that's your, your fruit trees, whether that's your nut orchard. This is setting the stage so that you are passively harvesting water as it moves down the landscape. So as that water is coming down the landscape, it falls into that basin. And since that basin's on contour, meaning it's not tilted and not shooting it one way or the other, that water has time to stop and then sink in. And it sinks in not just for that raised berm, but 30, 40 feet down slope, you're hydrating your landscape into the root lens. So this allows moisture to naturally be held in the soil, to percolate up, and this really makes your landscapes thrive, whether it's just lawn, whether it's pasture, whether it's your ornamental rose collection, or your food forest. This is a key design that makes a huge difference, because for soil fertility to thrive, it needs constant moisture. For fungi to thrive, you need constant moisture. So if you're relying on, overhead watering or some other supplemental way of watering, if you have a glitch in that and your soil starts to dry out, your fertility in your soil life, your soil biota and your fungi, they die off. And you're sort of getting this fluctuation that is really not serving the health of your soil. So getting this consistent passive water harvesting in place up front makes a world of difference. Really, it's in probably 90% of my designs. I definitely work with some form of passive water harvesting. A couple quick illustrations. This is the smaller scale, and we will talk about how to do this on a larger scale. But let's start with this because it's easier to conceptualize, as you're digging your basin and building your berm. Then amending the bed with compost or a ground cover is your next move here. Also, you can fill in, as you see, the basin with wood chips, leaves, organic matter. And then as you see the water comes down, it naturally falls in and begins to harvest for you passively. So how do you find contour? Contour can be done very easily, low tech, by building what's very ingeniously called an A-frame. With 3 pieces of wood and a little line level bubble, you can find contour yourself. This is easily found in more detail in my book or easily online. The A-frame is quite commonly used. It does the exact same work as a surveying tool, a laser survey. So this actually gets you very precise readings about how to see where the contour lays on your land. Again, just a little illustration out of my Edible Landscaping with a Permaculture twist book. Very easy to make. You can make one of these in 5 or 10 minutes, and then you're off finding contour on your landscape. Just by maneuvering it back and forth and finding where it stays level, marking it with a flag, you're discovering that contour. And you can move it around on your landscape to see, where it fits, where it's not getting into the flow of a road, running into a permanent tree. You can up and down the slope until it fits where you want. Get it to where you want before you start digging. So there are many different ways to do swales: by hand, by machinery, by tractor, depending on the scale, depending on your interests. This one was done with a mini excavator initially to get out the rough digging, and then we came along and we sort of amended, made sure that we were shaping that berm into, sort of a size that we were wanting it for. In this case, we were doing a food forest planting, so we were going a little wider, a little larger to accommodate the trees and then the companion plants that we put around them. That's my beautiful, amazing wife, Ashley, and that's our little boy, Wyatt, running around and not really helping. Um, these can also be beautiful and aesthetic. This is for a rural farm setting that had a lot of rainwater coming off of its barn. To the left, outside of the picture, actually is a market garden that is very traditional, meaning it's not harvesting water. So we retrofitted by putting this swale above it, capturing that water, and now sending it through that root lens and recharging for that market garden below. So You can fit these into a variety of different situations, retrofit if you've already got things in place, or more ideally, you're really getting these in place before you start to put other aspects in your landscape. So these are the gardens, the deer fenced gardens here at our place, and it is all swaled. It's basin, berm, basin, berm, basin, berm, basin, berm, one after the other. Now, most of the water is harvested, with the first basin and berm, but we can run the downspouts from nearby rooftops and drop that downspout into the second, the third, the fourth basin in our garden and add more supplemental water into this space. But really, the whole thing is holding moisture evenly, largely from the first basin. But having the continuous basin and berm model actually creates a lot of microclimates. The pathways are filled with organic matter, wood chips, straw that we can come along about every year and scoop out as rich compost and throw it on the beds. Go ahead and relay more wood chips and more straw. And this whole garden becomes one organism since it's consistently covered with organic matter. The fungi and the beneficial organisms can run throughout the whole space, and they have this constant moisture, they have the constant organic matters protection, and it thrives. It's hardly any work. We go in here, we harvest, we plant, and not a whole lot else. When weeds and things pop up, we just come in and throw newspaper or cardboard and straw over it. Don't even bother taking it out. We want to incorporate that organic matter and nutrients from those quote unquote weeds back into our soil building. So we're constantly layering this system so that it just builds on itself, reduces our work. And this garden space is actually used a lot for growing out our perennials. We grow a lot of our cuttings for our nursery in here. We'll grow elderberries in here, currants. I'm a big fan of lots of types of willows. There are hundreds of willows out there with multiple uses. Highly recommend growing willows. And a lot of different cuttings come into this space. I'll grow some things out from seed. I'll do some grafting in this space, and then I'll pull those out, either sell them bare root or pot them up and keep them for a season and sell them in the fall. Really, this space is multi-purpose, but the design of the swales is really key to its success. Okay, on a slightly larger landscape, this is actually a hybrid chestnut orchard that is planted here in Maryland as part of a nonprofit that I helped found called SilvoCulture. SilvoCulture.org focuses on planting nut trees that are economically viable. So not just, oh great, let's plant trees, but hey, how does this actually really make a living? And how does it get others interested in planting trees on a larger scale? So here we actually used a mid-size backhoe excavator, and we did approximately 10 acres of swales in one day. Yes, one day, 8 hours, we did an amazing amount of swales. So, renting a mini excavator for a day can really do wonders on a larger scale. So this, we just went ahead and seeded instead of, bringing in the amount of wood chips that it would take. We just, seeded this with different types of clovers in that basin portion, and then didn't really do too much amending to the berm. Went ahead and started planting our tree tubes, started planting nitrogen fixing trees along with each tree and other ground covers on that berm. This is showing another technique with a tractor where you can use a double bottom plow to go along, and that just cuts and throws soil to the downhill side and basically creates for you that basin and berm, again on a larger scale. This can be an easier way to do it. Then you want to come along and you can break up and harrow, disc harrow that raised berm to make it a smoother planting bed. And here is a 26-acre food forest that I've been designing and working on. And we used keyline design. So keyline design works with kind of a full holistic passive water harvest design, where on a larger landscape you're helping pull that water that gets concentrated into the valleys out onto the ridges. Mostly it's all contour, but you're playing with moving on and off contour so that you're making sure the water gets evenly distributed across the landscape. And keyline design, Mark Shepard has a great book that really kind of brings keyline into an understanding, which I really appreciate. So I recommend looking up his book on keyline work. I think it's called Water for Any Farm. And here we have used a double bottom plow, but this is also a large hay field. So to maintain it with ease of harvesting that hay, we did actually three runs with the double bottom plow, and then help scoot that over so that the basin is very shallow, so that you can actually run your hay cutting across it. And so you can taper slowly and then slowly up and then slowly down using this design, so that you can then efficiently continue to work with your cutting your hay. So again, these designs can be done everything from small scale by hand to larger scale, but it's key in the sense that you are setting up your landscape to passively harvest water. Otherwise, water is typically going to sheet right off. It's not going to absorb in, or it's going to get over concentrated in certain areas. So if you have the opportunity up front, I highly recommend learning about and putting in your passive water harvest designs before you jump into planting. And let's see if I can get this to work. This is a great aerial of this same 26-acre design that we're working on. And this is going to be planted with largely nuts, northern pecans, hybrid Asian chestnuts, mainly the Chinese chestnut. The Chinese chestnut is really one of the most productive chestnut that we have. We'll do some hickories, shagbark, shellbark, and bitternut hickories. We'll do select black walnuts, hazelnuts. Rutgers University is coming out with hybrid hazelnuts that seem to be promising for our region, for the mid-Atlantic. So really, again, persimmons, American persimmons, very productive, very high sugar content tree crop. But you can just see the potential for really sort of transitioning, what's been corn and soybean into perennial tree crops, and it being really economically viable. It's all very possible. Okay, so I'm going to touch just really quickly on hugelculture because it's also a great design that works for the rural homestead, even on small scale as well. But there's a lot of, especially in our part of the world, there's a lot of wood that comes down or that people seem to be really bent on cutting down. Either way, there's a lot of wood to be captured and used. And hugelculture is a Germanic word basically meaning wood that gets covered with soil. So in this case, what we've done, perpendicular to the slope, we've taken out the soil, dug it out, put the wood in, and then we've covered it back up. That same soil. This is basically what happens, in a forest over time. So we're imitating, again, a natural pattern where it's basically compost in place. That woody material is going to break down over a couple of years to become very nutrient rich and holding its own moisture. And initially we'll cover crop this and maybe plant some brambles and things as it continues to shift and break and drop down. Then we can come back in and start planting more permanent tree crops in that space. But also what this design is doing, as you can see to the left there, is a conventional sort of garden space with no design considerations for harvesting water. But now this hugelculture bed will act also as a water harvesting for water moving down the landscape. It'll fall into that dugout basin and it'll help harvest like a swale into that zone beyond it. But then also all that woody material in there will act like a sponge and hold it in that space as well. So hugelculture is a great hybrid with the swale. And here's a wonderful example of that from our friends, the Midwest Permaculture. It's also a take on the original illustration by Bill Mollison and David Holgram, the co-founders of permaculture, where we're stacking the functions here. We've got the swale, but the swale is also a hugelculture bed, and then we're planting the food forest on that. So you can see how this can all start to really come together. And again, I will recommend Mark Shepard's books, really. He has a couple of books where he is taking a lot of these concepts and applying them to larger landscapes, farmscapes, and kind of making it very approachable and very realistic, which I appreciate. Okay, let's get into the fruitful side of the food forest. So coming back to really kind of square one with this, on a more realistic level. Typically, a food forest is 1 to 2 acres because a food forest is very diverse. There's a lot going on in that space. The management of it doesn't need to be intense, but usually we hear and see food forests being in the ballpark of 1 to 2 acres. We have 3 acres of food forests, and it keeps us plenty busy. When we get into larger areas, I usually start to categorize that as agroforestry, and it starts to take on a slightly different design. So food forests, more on the homestead scale, look like this. This is a young food forest patch here at our place. In the forefront here, you see a menagerie of plants. Where in the very center, it's hard to see, but there's a young jujube tree in here. And around it, we've designed a little ecosystem for it. Let's call them perennial companions. In permaculture, we call these guilds. And they really can be a mixture of whatever you're called to plant, what you're interested in actually using. There are some themes that will cover, nitrogen fixing plants that help fix nitrogen for the other plants in this group, things that are insectaries, things that will draw in beneficial insects, pollinator plants that'll draw in those pollinators, mulch plants. But I don't want anyone to feel like they need to have a certain understanding of what to plant. Really going for it is the key, just doing it. You will be guided. The concept is you're creating diversity. Anything that's kind of not working out for you, then it's chop and drop. It's mulch in place. So you really can't go wrong. So I really encourage you to go for it. In this scenario, we have a lot of deer in our area, so always design for deer is up front. And so to protect that little jujube, we planted things that deer don't like. So starting in sort of the top right of this patch, we have the Egyptian walking onion, this really cool perennial onion that deer don't eat. They don't like the alliums. They don't like garlic and onions. So they come up to that and they're like, not liking that. They come down here. Next to it is this spiky little gooseberry. There at about, what would that be, about 4 o'clock. That's a spiky gooseberry. They come up and they get their noses poked and like, oh, that sucks. I'm moving on. They come to the very corner down here at about 6 o'clock, and that's sage. And they're like, oh, they don't like the aromatic herbs. So they keep moving. Next to that, coming over to the left is wormwood, another wonderful medicinal, but they're like, oh, we're not going to start eating that. And then they move along, and they never saw that juicy jujube tree in the middle. So you can be creative. Plant what you will harvest, what you will use. If it's herbs you want, plant herbs. If it's flowers you want, plant flowers. Get that diversity in there. And so this little area has got constant ground cover. It's got perennial habitat for beneficials to live in. You're not just planting that jujube tree in a sea of grass and kind of leaving it to its own. You're putting in organic matter, things that hold moisture, things that bring in diversity. That's kind of the essence of what we're after. So before I move on, in the back of this picture, you can see a SilvoCulture bed. You see some of that wood sticking out there. Again, this area was had some shrubby little trees in it, but it was south facing with protection from the north. So it's a perfect horseshoe shape for creating a microclimate. So we cleared out the trees that were there, created SilvoCulture beds, put in our swales. You can see a little pawpaw here in sort of the right here is sitting on a swale. You saw a picture earlier of that same swale. So SilvoCulture beds, swales, and then start to put in these food forest patches. And let's talk patches. So this is Mike's Deluxe sheet mulch recipe. You might have heard of sheet mulch, lasagna gardening. Basically you're layering these different organic matters to start to hold moisture, to start to break down and create compost in place, to basically kill off the grass or the weeds that are, what you're starting with. And there's many recipes. I think using wood chips really helps because it gives you more than 1 year of organic matter to build. But you could just start with compost, newspaper, and straw. That would break down and get you going, and but in about a year's time, a lot of that material would be consumed, and your soil life would be ready for some more. Which is why I like to do the extra wood chip layer up front, so that you're setting in place, 2, 3, 4 years of soil building at once. But work with what you got. Sometimes when we built our straw bale house, I had a ton of extra straw bales, so I did like a foot thick, deep patch with just straw. So use what you got. But really what you're doing is you're transitioning it from what it was, lawn or weeds, and you're beginning to get it into this organic, rich, consistently moist space to plant into. And plant yourself too if you want. We're actually, big proponents of natural burial. We have on the edge of our food forest our own home cemetery. And I think full circle considerations for holding each other and end of life transition, beginning and end, is very important. Anyway, this is actually, I put myself in this picture just to kind of give you scale. This is what I would call a single food forest patch, roughly 8 or 10 by 10, can be any shape you want. I use square because then I came along and put, newspaper and cardboard over it. But basically your first layer down on top is compost, leaf compost, manure. If you have access to it, is great. And then on top of that, covering that with newspaper and straw to help kill and make sure that grass doesn't grow up all happily through the compost you just put down. And then you could just stop with that and cover that with straw or mulch. But again, that's where I would do another layer of wood chips. And then I would generously cover that with straw again. Just be really generous. Go thick, go deep, go wide. Typically speaking, people do not mulch enough. When you're talking about trees, when you're talking about perennials, they developed over time in very fungal rich environments and forests. So they thrive in fungal rich environments, and the fungi thrive in organic matter and constant moisture. So grass, lawn, doesn't really have a whole lot of held moisture, organic matter, and fungi in it. So we want to begin to transition and create an environment that's really going to help them thrive, so that we're not on the hook for supplying what they need. This is that designing up front. This is designing for neglect, getting your things going, getting your systems going so that they will function for themselves, even better than we can do by constantly inputting into them. So. Another great little diagram to simplify the concept. Your main fruit producer in the center, get your ground covers going in, get your pollinators in, your nitrogen fixers, your mulch plants, your green manures or your green mulch. Again, this depends on what scale you're at. If you've only got a few patches and you've got lots of time and you want to maximize all the things you can grow in that space, then go ahead, put many things in that. I started doing that originally, but then I started getting too much to do. And I started just making my systems, 2 or 3 things: a nitrogen fixer, a ground cover, and, maybe an extra pollinator or fruit. In this case, the fuki, which is a perennial Japanese vegetable, a very, very wonderful spreading plant the deer do not eat. And a perennial vegetable to boot is my ground cover. And I've got nitrogen fixer in there. In this case, I've got a Siberian pea shrub, which is really only done moderate in our climate. The lead plant I mentioned earlier is a woody perennial the deer do not eat, and does much better for us, much more vigorous. So I can sort of chop and drop it as it grows if it becomes too big. But I do like to plant my nitrogen fixers in very close to my main fruit producers or nut trees, often in the exact same hole. And then I will chop and drop them back as they grow, really treating them or using them just as nurse plants. You can see the pawpaw popping out there in the middle. I got black currants. The black currant consort has done really well for us. It's a hybrid that's tough, very productive. We're kind of southern for a lot of the currants, which go a little more cool climate. So yeah, this example there. And even simpler than that, a lot of times I will just plant running comfrey. This is called Hidcote, Hidcote, running comfrey. So there's different types of comfrey. Many people are familiar with the standing comfrey, which I'm a big fan of as well. These plants are medicinal. They fix lots of nutrients into the topsoil. They are great pollinators for the bees and other early season, because these come up fast and they flower quickly and really support the insect life. They keep constant moisture, they give constant sort of shade to the soil. In the center is, a planted fruit tree, and you see I've got that welded wire fencing in there. That's really key for an area that has a lot of deer. I will use 60-inch, 5 feet tall. Make sure you're using 5 feet tall welded wire fencing if you have deer. 4 feet will not do it. So go 5 feet. Another thing I've learned is that sometimes the deer will actually stick their hoof in there and stand on it to eat your tree. So you might want to do some bird netting so they can't get their hoof in there. A couple of the tricks to having deer. But then once the tree is established, you don't need the fence. The deer can only reach to that, that 5 feet reach anyway. Your branches are coming out. So that's one of the ways to get things started. But the running comfrey in this case, you could use other types. I use mints. I use running mints also for ground covers. And so when I have multiple patches, as you can see these spaced out, I rely on these guys to help me. I don't have to worry about going in there and weeding or maintaining anything. But the loss of diversity is the backslide. For these patches, I'm really just focusing on my main fruit producer. So again, how much space, how much time you have, you can really sort of tailor the food forest, guild concept. Here you can see how we've done multiple patches, food forest patches, and we've spread them out depending on what we've planned to plant in the center of each. So many of these are small to medium-sized fruit trees. So we've done approximately 20-25 foot spacing in between the center of each patch. In the back area of this food forest area, we were doing nut trees. So we're doing more 30 and 40 foot spacing. So you can kind of start to begin to design an area thinking about, okay, well, I want to put in these types of fruit trees and these type of nut trees. So I will put the center of my patches and go out there and mark those. And then start your sheet mulch for each one of those. And then over time, as time allows as well, you can come along and extend those patches by putting down more straw, more wood chips, and allowing those ground covers or more plants that you're sticking in as sort of more of the understory or edge of the shade sun. It begins to expand. And then, give yourself time, and then you'll be able to one day walk through this area with a wheelbarrow and just being able to fill up your harvests, and the whole area will then just be one food forest. You don't necessarily have to conceptualize the entire food forest concept at once. Sometimes it's easier just to start patch by patch and then let the diversity and the dynamics actually naturally grow and begin to blend in. And there you'll have it. Believe it or not, this is all very approachable and doable. And then, of course, if you have an existing tree, you can retrofit that with the same style of sheet mulching. The tree will be much happier. Again, you're creating more fungal environment for it. You've obviously already got shade in existing trees, so you could come under that and do more understory plantings, more herbs and things that you might harvest. Really to be getting fruit out of something, you do need sunlight. So you keep that in mind. Try not to shade out things that you hope to get fruit for. If I was going to plant, let's say, a black currant around this existing apple tree, I would come probably out onto the edge where I would going to be getting sun. Maybe I would do that depending on where I am in the north or south. I would probably do that more on the east side so that it's getting lots of morning sun. But being a currant, it would probably like to have some protection from the hot afternoon sun. So really, you can play with these edges. I've now planted actually this with a running mint. So I have running mint under this apple tree, which also really benefits the pollinator balance for it. And then I also have inoculated the wood chips under this with the wine cap mushroom. So stacking functions, growing food in the same space, and creating symbiotic relationships. We actually grow a lot of mushrooms here on logs and on wood chips. The shiitakes and the oyster mushrooms are the easiest mushrooms to grow on logs. Again, shiitake and oak do really well. The oysters and our tulip poplars do really well. The willows are also really good woods for growing mushrooms on. Really many hardwood species grow certain types of mushrooms, but oysters and shiitakes are very easy to grow. So is the previously mentioned wine cap mushroom, which grows mostly in wood chips and organic matter. I recommend Field and Forest Products. They are out in Wisconsin. They are a wonderful company that sells everything you need to start growing your own mushrooms. Their website and their catalog is a very good how-to. I have a how-to chapter in my Edible Landscaping with a Permaculture Twist book that really helps walk you through learning how to grow mushrooms. And I do highly recommend growing mushrooms. They have a great return for something that you can grow and you sell or trade. They have a high value compared to a lot of other things that you spend time. All right, so all these wonderful fruits. I'm gonna have to, hold off on getting into talking about many of my favorite fruits and nuts. That'll have to be another discussion. I do have them in my books, of course. In this picture, in the far right, you've got the hardy kiwi, sometimes called kiwi berry. Coming down in the bottom right corner is the beautiful pawpaw. Sort of bottom center here, this is a che fruit, C-H-E, like Che Guevara. It is a mulberry relative, fantastic fruit. It's sort of watermelon with fig flavor to it, very beautiful, fast-growing tree. Edible Landscaping Nursery in Virginia has some of these. Seedless, which is definitely what you want. That orange there on the left is actually a northern orange called trifoliate orange. We grow these here. We're in about zone 6B, and it's just like a sour lemony orange. Don't get too excited, but it's cool to grow an orange in your landscape. And the deer don't eat it. It's very thorny. So very attractive. A little bit of American persimmon peeking out there on the left. I'm a big fan of the American persimmon, especially the select cultivars. An American persimmon tree can produce up to 100 pounds of fruit, and they're only second to dates in sugar content. So there's a lot of potential here, I think, for value adding them into wine, brandies. I think turning them into alcohol. I think turning a lot of excess fruit into something value added is economically a good way to go versus trying to sell, sort of your fruit direct to market, depending on where you're at. But of course, then we got figs and there's some walnuts in there. Anyway, like I say, that's a whole nother session, which I might actually record. I've been thinking about doing some online courses, so we'll see what life brings. But I always love to talk about what I call uncommon fruits that are easy to grow, productive, and tasty. Touch on this really quick as well. Our small nursery here is very low input. We do not have a greenhouse, do not need a greenhouse. I've found that you can successfully grow a lot of plants with basically, I use my garden to grow a lot of things out. The very few things that I grow in pots, I put into these little A-frame structures with shade cloth on them. And I use very deep tree pots, typically 14 inches deep. Stew and Sons is a a place that sells these deep tree pots. And I like them because they encourage deep root growth, but they also hold moisture for a long time in the bottom of their pot. That, coupled with having a shade cloth, allows me not to have to water my plants at all. Yes, at all. So again, reducing my constant inputs so that I can do many things. I can grow, my mushrooms. I can have my gardens, my food forest, and my nursery without becoming super overwhelmed because they're designed to largely manage themselves. Really key. Oh, the pawpaws. Yes, the pawpaw is phenomenal. It's a tropical fruit that grows in the north. There's nothing like it. It grows throughout many parts of the temperate world. It's pushing new boundaries. Yes, grow them in full sun because that's where you get full fruit. Again, I wrote a whole book on it. Also, our website has a lot of information about the pawpaw, and a lot of these other designs actually can be explored through, my website, ecologiadesign.com. I'll put that in here at the end as well. But the pawpaw it's a tropical fruit. It's the only member of the Annona tropical custard apple family that migrated over thousands and thousands of years up into what we call modern day southern Canada, Ontario. So this grows in the north. It's amazing. It has a custard consistency, the flavors of banana, mango, pineapple, vanilla. It is exquisite. Of course, you need to be looking for the improved genetics. Some of the wild pawpaws may not have all of those wonderful characteristics, but the improved genetics definitely do. You can get 1 to 2 pound fruits on a tree in full sun with good genetics. You could be getting 35 plus pounds of fruit per tree. So actually very productive, very high market value. We have a festival every fall and sell all of our fruit directly through our festival, $10 a pound. Yes, it's amazing. At this stage, it's also very economically viable, and more pawpaw orchards are coming online as people, sort of become aware once again that we have this amazing fruit in our mix. And yep, there's an image from our Pawpaw Fest. Having a festival at your site or an event can be a wonderful way to, bring in income. It can be a great way to help people learn about a different way of living and growing and doing things. So think about the potential for your homestead to be a place, a venue for events, whether it's workshops or small festivals, as part of your plan. It's worked out really well for us. Oh, and chestnuts. Oh gosh. Again, a whole nother presentation opportunity here for nuts. A lot of my work has come to focus on nuts as really for food security and for real economic viability, and something that'll be here for hundreds of years. Hybrid chestnuts, again, the hickories, the pecans, really sort of focusing on food security through growing out perennial food. And the nuts are what really sticks to the ribs and feeds the wildlife. It really feeds the whole ecosystem. Again, check out SilvoCulture.org for the nonprofit that I started, focusing on nuts. I really think the effort and the time putting into nuts is some of the most valuable. There you go. Come visit us at our website. Here you will find all the different things that we have going on, more resources. Sign up for our intermittent email. If you can come out to one of our events, great. But I do intend at some point to be doing more online courses and things. So Thank you. Thanks for listening to all this. I wish you all a fruitful path and lots of abundance, and yeah, blessings all around.